Hey everyone, welcome back to L2 Games and welcome to episode 9 of the L2Games Podcast. Today is going to be a special episode. It is going to be our first official crossover episode with Snubs and Dubs. So I want to give a very warm welcome to one of the creators and co-hosts of Snubs and Dubs, as well as the man who is single-handedly keeping the Blu-ray and 4K DVD industry alive, my good friend Kyle. Kyle, how are you doing?
I'm good. I hope I'm not the only one, because that will be a quick death for that industry if I am the only one. But I am great, and I'm happy to be here to talk about some video game movies.
Before we get started on that, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about Snubs and Dubs?
Sure. Snubs and Dubs is a Best Picture podcast, but don't worry if you don't like the Oscars, it's not as boring as that. We go through a year in film. We talk about 25 movies, including the nominees for Best Picture in that year, but we'll also include some of the other noteworthy and potentially snubbed films of that year. So far in Season 2, we've talked about things like Big Hero 6 and Nightcrawler, Interstellar, all that weren't nominated for Best Picture that year, but maybe they should have been, and maybe they should have won. So come join us as we go through that season. We are just about 3 episodes in now. Interstellar should be going out by the time that this episode goes live, so I'm excited to have you guys come along, and I'm excited to be here.
And I will leave a link in the description so everyone can go check that out. So Kyle, what got you into movies so much? I know you're a huge cinephile. You have probably the biggest collection of movies I've ever seen. So what got you into that?
I don't really know. Like, it started kind of probably from a young age. We had like a weekly tradition in my household where on Friday night we go over to like a Blockbuster to like rent a movie. And so like with that kind of weekly tradition, we was watching a lot of movies, and I just got more and more interested in them as time went on. When they became more accessible, like through streaming and then through having money to actually buy Blu-rays, I got even more so into them. And then particularly in like the kind of the later year of my high school years, I was going to a lot of movies. I lived really close to the theater, so I was going over there all the time, even like after work. I was at the movie theater constantly, and ever since then, I've always gone to the movie theater at least once a week, and I've just loved movies and loved talking about movies, so yeah.
Speaking of talking about movies, that's what we're here to do today. So you guys might be listening to this thinking, why the hell are you talking about movies? This is a gaming channel. Well, we're talking about video game movies, and specifically, we're talking about Uncharted, the latest and maybe the greatest video game movie? I don't know. Kyle, what are your thoughts on Uncharted?
I had a lot of fun, and I was not going in with the expectation that I was going to have any fun. In fact, I went with my girlfriend Molly, and when we were having dinner beforehand, I was like, you know what, this is probably going to be shit, but let's just have a good time. And on the way home, we can talk shit about it and laugh about it. But on the way home, we were just talking about how much we actually enjoyed it, and it was quite surprising.
Yeah, to be honest, I went in with the same low expectations. The whole few weeks leading up to it, I was like, I don't know if I even want to see this, because I'm pretty sure it's going to be garbage. And I came out and I was pleasantly surprised. Traditionally, video game movies have not done well, at least critically. I mean, looking at critical reception, Uncharted also isn't technically doing well. It's sitting at a 40%, I think, on Rotten Tomatoes right now. Yeah. But audience score has been great. It's been holding steady at a 90% since it released.
Which is really good, and it's kind of what I've seen from a lot of video game movies, at least thus far. And even some movies like, I forget this director's name, but he also directed Venom, like the first Venom. And that
Ruben
was also
Fleischer,
another one.
yeah.
Yeah, Ruben Fleischer. That was like not so well critically, but it made a lot of money and a lot of people enjoyed it because of it kind of goofy and fun. But with this, it seems that people didn't go in with sort of the snobby critical expectation of like a masterful cinema, but just like a good popcorn blockbuster that you can sit down and watch Mark Wahlberg and Tom Holland just do their usual stuff.
Mm-hmm. To be honest, I forgot that Ruben Fleischer actually directed Venom, so I'm realizing now we've got the whole Sony gang here. But
Yeah.
Before we get into that too much, I remember when I was on Snubs and Dubs with you, one of the things you had us do was go through and rate the movies we were talking about on a scale of 1 to 10.
Mm.
So instead of saving that for the end, I want to get your rating of Uncharted on a scale from 1 to 10.
I would probably give it like a 7 out of 10. Is it amazing? No. But did I come out of it having a good time? And I'm probably going to pick up the 4K when it comes out? Like, absolutely. I would recommend it to people too. Like, if you're looking for something fun to watch, it's a good time. So, and that in my mind is a 7 out of 10.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like 7 to 8 out of 10 is where I'd fall in. You know, it's not the greatest movie out there. There's a few quirks it has. There were a few pacing issues here and there. I wish there had been a little more action, but overall, it was a fun ride. I found myself maintaining my interest in the movie throughout the whole runtime.
Yeah, same.
So, what do you think Uncharted did right? Because historically, we've seen video game movies that people just laugh at, and it seems like there's something you can't really take seriously because they're always full of cringy, clunky expositional dialogue or just weird cinematography choices, things that just put you off. So, what did Uncharted get right?
I think I really liked the kind of fun adventure romp of it. And going in, I didn't think that it was the best cast movie, but that I really did fall into the actors that were portraying Nathan Drake and Sully, and of course Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg, and even like some of the supporting cast. Antonio Banderas was only kind of briefly in it, but he was good. And I think that the cast kind of carried the energy too, which I should have expected from someone as like charismatic as Tom Holland. I also really liked the third act. I thought that it could have completely gone CGI like fuckfest, but it actually ended up being something that was really fun, and I think it kept the energy levels up for the most part the entire time, and it also kept my interest for a while with some of the mystery bits. But yeah, what about you?
Well, there were a few things that I really enjoyed, but looking at the performances of Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg, especially Tom Holland, he really did a great job of capturing the persona of Nathan Drake. I still have a few issues with the casting, and we'll get to that, but I felt like personality-wise, he nailed Nathan Drake.
Yeah.
Other than that, the dialogue was actually surprisingly well written, especially compared to other video game movies. I tried to watch Monster Hunter over the weekend so I could prepare for this, and I couldn't make it 20 minutes into that movie because I was rolling my eyes the whole time so far back that they went into the back of my head and I just shut down. I couldn't watch the movie. I physically could not. The dialogue in that movie was just such garbage. One of the lines early on in the movie, Artemis, Mila Jovovich's character, says, "Come on, ladies," and then this other guy says the cringiest shit I've ever heard, and it's, "She's a woman, but she still manages to make that sound like an insult."
Yeah,
like,
that was just oof.
Like, thank you for the super on-the-nose comment. We didn't need you to say it, but thanks. So I was really surprised to see that there was really strong banter between Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg as far as the dialogue goes. There weren't too many moments where I thought, that doesn't sound like something someone would say. There were a couple lines, like when Nate is referencing his brother, he'll say, "My brother Sam," like, "Oh, you know my brother Sam," or "I came to find my brother Sam." I feel like in that situation, maybe it should have been just either my brother or Sam.
Yeah.
Like, we know Sam is your brother.
The trailer too.
And like that kind of put me off, but other than that, it was it was well written. Conversations flowed smoothly, and I appreciate that, especially given, like, one of the problems I see with video game movies in general is that they try to cram so much exposition into these movies because it's, you're taking an 8 to 50-hour game and trying to cram it into a 2-hour or less runtime. And so they've got all these things where they're trying to outright explain every little detail of the game and invest people in this world, and it just doesn't work. It's like the Dark Knight Rises, when he's talking about the clean slate where you type in someone's name, date of birth, and in seconds they're gone from every database in the world. And like, I can't take that kind of stuff seriously.
No, yeah, and I think some of the problems that other video game adaptations to film have had that this one maybe didn't was that they're picking games that are popular, but not necessarily popular for the sense of their story. Like in the case of Monster Hunter, like I know there's a huge amount of lore there, but do they have great storylines that people remember when they leave the game? Whereas like Uncharted, like you play through and there's a definitive start, arc, and an end. And so Uncharted came from a narrative story-based video game, and while you're not getting the same experience that you're getting from a 10 to 20 hour video game that you are in a 2.5 hour movie or so, but you can still get good narrative beats that translate well into a screenplay.
And to perhaps give a better example of that than Monster Hunter, you look at Mortal Kombat. The Mortal
Yeah.
Kombat games are almost completely devoid of storytelling. It's all about the visual, gory action. And
Yep.
so that movie last year, it's really hard to adapt a screenplay of a game that's literally just two guys beating each other to death in the most gruesome way possible. There's really only so much you can do with that. And to its credit,
Yeah.
Mortal Kombat was an entertaining movie, but the story was awful.
Yeah, and they didn't even get to Mortal Kombat. Like they didn't even get to the tournament of Mortal Kombat. Like this whole story was just like introducing this random new character to maybe participate in a fighting tournament that's going to happen, I guess, in the next movie, but you know.
All right, well, before we get too sidetracked, going back to Uncharted, the pacing overall was pretty good. There were a few parts where it felt a little slow. I could
Yeah.
have used a little more action, but my favorite thing about it was that they treated it as a movie first, and they didn't
Hmm.
try to gamify it.
Yep.
One thing I can't stand is when directors and screenwriters of these video game adaptations try to make the movie like a hybrid of the video game and a screenplay, and
Yep.
they make all these weird choices, like even as far as the cinematography goes. I swear every video game movie overuses these weird 3D orbiting shots as if they're trying to capture like a player turning their camera around a character in a third person action game, and it just looks so jarringly unnatural that I
Yep.
can't help but laugh. One of the worst ones for it, other than Monster Hunter, which was pretty bad in the first 20 minutes I saw, but
Hmm.
Assassin's Creed had these orbiting, establishing shots of battlefields and cities and stuff that is supposed to be from an eagle's point of view. Now, I know that's a direct reference to the games. I get it. You just shouldn't have done it. It doesn't work in the context of the movies. In the game, it's a cool shot and it's a nice little thing when you climb to the top of
Yeah.
the tower and you see all the POIs around you and whatever. But it doesn't feel like a movie. It feels like you're trying to force a game into a movie. And
Hmm.
where Uncharted did well is that it treated it like an action movie first, and
Yep.
then left the video game stuff to small visual Easter eggs, like when Chloe's climbing on top of Nate's shoulders to look inside the urns full of salt. So that's a big reference to all the times that in the Uncharted and the Last of Us games from Naughty Dog, you're boosting someone up on your shoulders so they can climb over something.
Mm.
Or when Nate's climbing up the side of the pirate ship to get in and grab all the gold. Again, it's sort of a visual callback to the games without being too on the nose and without trying to gamify the movie.
Yeah, I also really like just in general adventure movies with like artifacts and history, and I think it did pretty well to like introduce some history and have this sort of like quest. And while it's not Indiana Jones, it was good in that regard. And those type of movies aren't as common nowadays in like modern cinema. Like you don't really get a good adventure flick nowadays.
All right, so we've sort of covered what Uncharted did well. What didn't you like about it?
I wasn't a big fan of like how often there was sort of like revenge or backstabbing sort of things going on. I didn't really the I guess kind of spoilers, but when Antonio Banderas' character bites the dust, I didn't really think that was well earned, and I wasn't that surprised by it either, because he didn't really have much to do throughout. and
Hmm.
the whole like side of his family and like his motivation, it didn't really even come into fruition because like his father was going to cut him off, and like this was his big plan to sort of get the money back so he can get cut off and not have to worry about it, or maybe he needs to kill his father. But oh, and he did kill his father, didn't he?
Yeah,
Or
he had his
yeah,
goon kill his
right,
father.
right, right, right. Yeah. But then it all kind of is for naught because he gets killed by one of the people that he's hired anyways. And so that, oh, and there was another character, the other goon that he hired. I forget her name.
Um,
Not Chloe, but
yeah,
the other one.
Joe. Was it Joe?
Someone.
Braddock was her last name. I know that. So
Right, right, right. Yeah,
Braddock.
yeah.
Yeah.
She was kind of forgettable as a villain. Clearly forgettable because I don't even remember her name. But yeah,
Yeah, that was one of my big problems too, is the villains were just really underutilized. They never really felt like a threat. It felt like more of the conflict in this movie came from the relationship between Nate and Sully, or Nate and Chloe. And like you said, those backstabbing moments really didn't feel earned, and they didn't come as surprises because there were just
yeah,
so many of them that it never really throws you off. You're just waiting, oh, when's the next time this person's going to turn on this person?
hmm,
And what sort of bugged me about that is that it's such a far cry from the relationship between Nate and Sully in the games, because they've sort of got this father son, or maybe drunken uncle and nephew relationship in the games where, Sully, yeah, he's a con man, but he's one of the closest things Nate has left to family, and they
yeah,
get along really well. They have a really strong, trusting relationship. So it was a bit jarring to see them be so antagonistic with each other. Of
yeah,
course, I know it's an origin story, but I still wish they had showcased a little more of the almost sort of bromance relationship between them. And talking about the villains too, I really wish Antonio Banderas had gotten a little more screen time, because it really
yeah,
felt like he had a genuine motivation to want to go after this treasure. And
yeah.
I really wish that had been explored a little more, because at the end of the day, you're left with four characters in Braddock, Chloe, Sully, and not so much Nate, but sort of, who are really only interested in it because it's worth a lot of money.
Yeah, and I agree. Like, it didn't. There was never really a sense of security for Nate, like in any relationship. Like, you couldn't really trust anyone, like even Sully to an extent. Like, I don't really think Sully necessarily wrongs him in any way, but he is holding a lot of information from Nate, and so you get the sense that you're not supposed to trust Sully. And then when kind of every sort of backstabbing moment happens, like you get the sense that you can't really trust anybody. And then so is Nate like just kind of going to get screwed over throughout this entire thing, or is he eventually going to maybe make a change, and through his genuine personality is he going to bring somebody on board that is very trustworthy and can communicate well with him, which I guess ultimately is Sully. And like you said, this is an origin story, so we are going to have that conflict and friction to start, but maybe in the next time they'll be more buddy buddy. But yeah,
And you sort of see with that, there's a bit of conflicting messaging around the film, because we see Nate is really naive when it comes to trusting people. And, of course, he sees Chloe as this pretty girl who's batting her eyelashes at him and instantly begins to trust her despite Sully warning him not to. But he's also over trusting of Sully and gets stabbed in the back multiple times. And I can't really, it's hard to tell really where they wanted Nate's story to go. Like, is it a cautionary tale for him anyway about learning to not be so trusting of other people? Or is it about trying to change those characters and convince them that you don't have to be so on your guard around other people all the time?
yeah,
And you would think that, we get exposure to Nate early on that shows us he's a thief. He's grown up basically by himself on the streets. So you would think
hmm,
maybe he isn't so naive. And yet here we have him just instant trust with everyone, which I
yeah.
felt like didn't necessarily fit with his origins that well.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's another thing is I kind of forget how early in the movie like you see him kind of be scummy and like steal from like just unsuspecting people like right off their wrists, and then he goes and breaks into Sully's house. So like is this guy not the best guy? But then you're supposed to assume that he's genuine in comparison to these other people. I have more hope for like a follow-up that maybe that will be more consistent, but as it started, like I think trying to get the footing on these characters, there was a bit of an uphill battle, I think.
And I feel like one of the difficulties might have been the fact that they did try to stray away from Nate and Sully's origins in the game. I
Hmm.
was very misled about what this story was supposed to be going in, because I was under the impression that the whole point behind casting Tom Holland was to tell the story of a younger Nathan Drake who we hadn't seen in the games. Of course, if you've played Uncharted 3, you know that Nate meets Sully in Colombia when he's stealing Sir Francis Drake's ring from a museum. Of course, Sully was hired to get the same thing, and they sort of come into conflict with each other. And so you see already Nate is this, smart-ass street thief who doesn't trust anyone. So by straying away from that sort of origin story, it kind of gives conflicting characterizations of Nate. And
Hmm.
I mean, that was my other issue with the movie, is that I felt like there was an opportunity to not create a new canon for Uncharted with this movie universe, but rather add to the existing canon by exploring a period in Nate and Sully's relationship that we hadn't seen before. And
Yeah.
again, I thought that was the reasoning behind casting Tom Holland, because he was supposed to be a young Nathan Drake. But
Yeah.
if you look at where the movie starts with him and Sam in the orphanage, you've got a young Nate, and let's err on the side of him being young here. He is at least 10 years old, if not older. And
Hmm.
then the rest of the movie is taking place 15 years later. So he's 25 years old in this. In the first game, Nate is 31 years old. That's not a huge age gap.
No.
So really, he's not playing a young Nathan Drake, and Mark Wahlberg isn't playing a young Sully. They're just playing Nate and Sully.
Yeah, just maybe like slightly earlier than the first game.
Hmm. What did you think of the casting choices? Because I know you said you were a little bit skeptical of them, as was I, as were a lot of people online.
I mean, I think everybody and their mother knew that Nathan Fillion was the desirable choice for Nate, and I think he'd even done like a short film where he
Hmm.
played Nate before. But Nathan Fillion is not at the age I think that they wanted to have a franchise starting, because they clearly want this to be a franchise,
Hmm.
and so casting a little bit younger does make sense. But with it being Tom, like I think there was the worry that there wouldn't be enough separation between him and Peter Parker.
Hmm.
And then people would sort of just see the same thing because obviously Tom is an English actor playing American characters. And so he's going to sound like the same as he does when he's playing Peter Parker as he does to Nate Drake. But um, yeah, I didn't really have a desired casting choice beyond that. I just, when I first saw it, I just initially thought that that's a bit of a strange choice.
Hmm.
And it did also feel like they were just buying into the hype. Like obviously
Yeah.
Sony is producing this and they produced the games and they now have like a firm grasp on Tom Holland as their Spider-Man and their Nate Drake. And so Sony really is sinking their teeth into Tom Holland, and I guess they have a good relationship because they want him to be in two of their largest franchises.
Hmm. Yeah, for me, the casting of Tom Holland in the lead role really felt like Sony was turning to their golden boy. For Sony,
Yep.
Tom Holland is the A-list star. He will sell out
Hmm.
theaters for them right now. And of course,
Yep.
this started production well before No Way Home, but in
Hmm.
hindsight, you look at all the money that's brought in, and of course, Tom Holland's going to be an easy choice. But for me, watching the movie, I felt it was distracting to have Tom Holland playing Nathan Drake because I didn't see Nathan Drake. What I saw was Tom Holland playing Peter Parker cosplaying as Nathan Drake. You know,
Yeah,
it was really
yeah, so
distracting throughout the movie. And
mhm.
like I tried to get on board with it because, and to Tom Holland's credit, he's an incredible actor and he did a great job portraying the persona of Nathan Drake. It's just
Mhm.
he didn't really feel like the character. And I'm not one to normally get hung up on an actor's appearance as far as playing a certain role when a screenplay is adapted, but he just felt off.
Yeah, because like nothing against the guy, but he's also a short guy.
Hmm.
And I didn't really envision Nate Drake as being a short guy. Granted, I haven't played any of the Uncharted games, which is, shame on me, but I don't really have a sense of the character beyond what I've seen in like some videos or trailers for the game. But even still, like Tom just felt like either like too young or too small or not too small. That's kind of rude, but a little short
Yeah. Did you
for the
see the
character.
scene with him shirtless? Man's not small.
Yeah. No, I was actually gonna say like he did actually get quite big for this role. He almost looked too big for his body at some points. Like he was a beefcake in this one, but yeah, it maybe could have been cast a little bit differently, but I understand the reasonings why they
Hmm.
did it, and he didn't end up being a bad choice in my
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah, he did a great job playing the character. I just feel like he's a little too youthful.
Yeah.
It feels like he should be playing a teenager in this. It's hard for me to take
Hmm.
Tom Holland seriously as an adult, and that might be the Spider-Man bias. I've seen
Yeah.
him playing nothing but a teenager for the last half a decade, so
Yeah, well, it also doesn't help that No Way Home came out like a month before this,
mhm,
or like
yeah,
I guess it not a little bit more than a month, but it was still in the public consciousness. It was still number one at the box office by
yeah.
the time that it had come out. So Tom Holland was really on the forefront of everyone's mind, and we had just seen him, probably multiple times as a teenager or somebody portraying a teenager. And
Mhm.
now we're seeing him as Nathan Drake, and we're expected to believe that he's 25 years old now. But he still looks the same, and he still
Mhm.
sounds the
Yeah.
same.
How'd you feel about Mark Wahlberg?
I mean, he was Mark Wahlberg. I don't think he was even playing a character. I think he was just doing his base Mark Wahlberg thing, and that was just what they carried through the entire movie. He didn't really blow me away by in any capacity. He was just kind of felt like he was coasting in a way. Like
Hmm.
this was an easy paycheck for him, and they probably did write the character of Sully with the casting in mind after, or they might have rewritten it once they hired Mark Wahlberg because it just felt like Mark Wahlberg, and that was like not it wasn't jarring because he's clearly himself doing his usual stick, but I also have no reference to what Sully is supposed to be like, and so
Hmm.
that might have been worse for you. I'm interested what you thought of that casting.
I didn't mind. Interestingly, if you didn't already know, Mark Wahlberg was actually the first person attached to this project. He was originally
Hmm.
supposed to play Nathan Drake, which I feel like maybe would have suited him a little more, although I could not take Nathan Drake seriously with a Boston accent. That's one of the things about Mark Wahlberg that makes me feel like he's playing the same character all the time because that accent just does not go away regardless of who he's
Hmm.
playing. It's always there.
Yeah.
But as far as the characterization, I felt like maybe he could have been Sully, but the screenplay was written in a way where his part in the movie wasn't really what we're used to seeing out of Sully from the games. He's not this father figure to Nate. He is
Hmm.
this, underhanded con man who
Yeah.
is out for his own ends. And yeah, sure, in the games, Sully is in it for the money, but he's also got a sense of humor about it, and he never feels like someone that you can't really trust. He's generally pretty upfront with Nate. And again, being an origin story, obviously it's going to take some time to build that trust, but
Yeah.
I felt like they could have done a little better of a job writing him. But for his part, I felt Mark Wahlberg was fine. Like I didn't feel
Yeah.
distracted by him the same way I felt distracted by Tom Holland. The one thing
Hmm.
I will say is there was no reason not to give him the mustache in this movie. That would have just helped sell him on the character a little bit more. We don't need an origin story for Sully's mustache. And that's kind of
Yeah.
what this movie felt like it was. It's like it's building up to that moment where he's gonna walk in rocking that beauty, and
Yeah.
you didn't
Sure
need it.
enough.
Just give him the mustache. Come on.
Yeah. Does Sully also have a cat in the games? Because that was a beautiful cat, and I appreciate any time where there's a cat in a movie.
I don't remember him ever having a cat. It's possible that we just don't really ever see it in the games, but I don't remember him
Yeah.
having a cat.
I like that he brought it with him on the post-credit scene, because that is one pretty kitty, and it probably deserves to be a globe-trotting puss.
Now, as far as the games go, I know you didn't play them, but just to cap off our discussion of Uncharted, a few of the things that I did really like as far as reminding us that this was a video game were, again, those visual Easter eggs. They did borrow a lot story-wise from a lot of the games and sort of mash it together. Of course, the opening shot of the movie is this close up on Nate, and then we zoom out to see that he's dangling from the back of a plane, and that's sort of a hybrid of the opening scene of Uncharted 2, where he's passed out in the back of a train that's fallen off a cliff, and the scene in Uncharted 3 where he is falling out of the back of a cargo plane, much like in the movie. And then, of course, we see the auction in the beginning of the movie, which is pulled pretty much directly out of Uncharted 4, where Nate's got to go shut down the power while Sully tries to steal a cross, which is literally the same thing they were stealing in Uncharted 4. So that kind of felt a little bit lazy to me, but I did enjoy that they managed to reference the games without being super on the nose about it, with the one exception of Nolan North's cameo.
Oh my god. Yeah, that was coming to my mind a little bit too. That was just the laziest but also cringiest shoe-in that they ever did, and it lingered for so long. I don't know why it had to stay on screen for so long. Like, just have him like pop up for a second, say one or two words, and then pass by. But they just kept on him and kept on him, and I was like, yes, we get it, it's Nolan North, move on.
Although somehow I really enjoyed it. I was really happy to see him involved with this, because it wouldn't have felt right without him. But yeah,
definitely not. No, like, he deserved the cameo, but I don't know why they had to linger for so long.
It could have been a little better written. There's nothing I hate more than when video game movies have to make just such a super explicit reference to the games.
Yeah.
The worst one, though, is Mortal Kombat. Do you remember the scene where Kung Lao kills Natara with his hat, and then he brings it back to him, and then he looks into the camera and says, "Flawless victory."
Oh my god. I think that was one moment. I was watching this at home. I literally face palmed. It was hand to face and like audible groan when that happened.
Yeah, and I mean, there were some moments in that movie where, such a direct reference to the game worked. There's the scene where Kano rips out Reptile's heart and then says, "Kano wins." And like that fit with his character, but flawless victory, that didn't belong there.
No. No, it didn't belong at all.
And in much the same way, I felt like the Nolan North cameo could have been handled a little better.
Mm-hmm.
So, overall thoughts on Uncharted?
It's good. It's fun. I honestly, like, it is like leaving my brain as we speak. Like, I saw it on release day, same as you, and that's what 2 weeks ago now. And I am like, having flashes now that we're talking about it, but like, I honestly didn't really give it much thought after we left, other than that I knew that it was fun and I enjoyed it, and I will be there for a sequel, and I will be there when it comes out in 4K.
That was going to be my next question, is would you see a sequel to this?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing a little bit more now that studios are more willing to produce sequels to video game adaptations. Of course, we've got Sonic the Hedgehog 2 coming out relatively soon. So I'm interested to see an Uncharted sequel. This is, I think, for me, the first video game movie that I've thought about seeing in theaters twice. I really enjoyed it, and I would have gone to see it a second time. Overall, really fun. So I want to move on now to a little more of a broad discussion as far as video game movies go, because this one is doing well both with audiences and financially. We won't talk about the critics because I feel like they just don't understand the source material. So this movie got a lot right. It seemed to treat it as a movie first. It wrote a solid screenplay. The actors gave good performances. But over the last, 20 years or so, we've had a good handful of video game movies, and yet not very many of them are all that memorable. I know I was talking to you before this about, what video game movies have you seen recently? And I think we both had a little trouble coming up with movies we've seen because they're just not memorable.
Yeah. I think that's just like the common curse with video game movies, at least up to date, is that they come, they go. Sometimes they're fine, sometimes they're bad.
Sometimes they're Monster Hunter.
Yeah. But overall, they seem to be the kind of movies that go in one ear and out the other a few weeks later, and like they don't really stay and resonate with people like some of the games would,
Hmm.
or just any other like blockbuster will do.
And why do you think that is?
I think there's just been a lack of like quality adaptation to
Hmm.
do with it.
Okay.
And like I kind of mentioned that some of the other games that they've chosen to adapt aren't really the best suited for stories
Hmm.
and screenplays. Like Sonic is one of those games where like Sonic obviously has a lot of history, it has some lore,
But
but
it
there's
doesn't have
not
a
been a
real
game
like.
about him and James Marsden, fucking hanging out and going to a bar. Like that's never happened. So
Yeah,
there's no precedent for it.
there's not a lot of narrative elements around Sonic, especially the earlier Sonic games where it's a 2D side
Yeah.
scroller and you really don't get
Hmm.
anything other than the platforming action.
Yeah. And like Mortal Kombat again also has lore, but then like the narratives just aren't there. And so people are trying to come up with stories that fit in with the like I guess general concept and themes, obviously bring in these characters, but they're throwing them into like very bare bones and basic stories just so they can cash in on the known name, the pre-sold
Hmm.
franchise and get a quick buck and move on.
And that's what I feel like is the big problem with them too. You look at the movies that Paul W.S. Anderson has pumped out, and financially they
Yeah.
all do really well. I was looking at Resident Evil, the final chapter, and on a budget
Hmm.
of $40 million, it made 331 million. So that's a pretty good
Jeez.
return for a movie that, for the content of the movie, was just awful. On a side note, I feel really bad for Paul Thomas Anderson. Imagine being an Oscar nominated director who's put out some fantastic movies and having to
Yeah.
share a first and last name with this guy who just hammers out these poorly written video game adaptations for a quick buck and
Yep.
having to use your initials to make sure you like I'm not that Paul Anderson. I'm the good Paul Anderson.
Yeah, I mean, like it's kind of a like a common name, Paul and Anderson. So, like, if there was going to be two directors with the same name, I'm not surprised it was Paul Anderson. But like Paul Thomas Anderson and Paul W. S. Anderson are totally different people and do totally different work.
It's
And
such a
yeah, Paul
stark
Thomas Anderson.
contrast between the quality of their work too.
Yeah.
I also realized I didn't know before that Paul W.S. Anderson was not only the director of Monster Hunter, but he also was the screenwriter for it. And
Hmm.
it's so awful. It's so bad. I can't with that movie. Like it was painful for me to actually watch it. But again, it's like you
Yep.
said, it feels like it's a very quick turnaround. You know, they've got
Hmm.
relatively low budgets compared to most modern movies, and it's an easy way to capitalize on the brand recognition. Although with that in mind, looking at the movies like Resident Evil and Monster Hunter, I always questioned, like, part of me questioned whether those were actually video game adaptations because they don't use the series trademarks as their logos. He
No.
comes up with some like edgy, whatever the fuck logo he wants for these movies that, like,
Yeah.
and of course the content of the movie doesn't really match the games either. So
No.
there's
Yeah.
that whole thing.
I think that's been like another issue so far that the people that have been making these video game adaptations haven't been doing them well, and they've kind of gone into a stigma where people assume that video game movies are going to be bad,
Hmm.
and so that might have gotten into the heads of the studios. Which I mean, nowadays we're seeing more people and more projects pop up related to video games, and I have another theory about why that is. But like historically, video game movies have not done well.
Hmm. And
Now, though, oh,
oh
sorry, go
no,
ahead.
one of the difficulties I've had is that it feels like the studios and the directors aren't taking the movies seriously.
Yeah,
It's like they don't really show the kind of respect that the source material needs to do well
yeah,
because you know they just see this name and say, "Oh, well, this is popular with fans, but it's just some dumb video game, so we can do whatever, you know, take some creative
yeah,
license with it." And you've got a really passionate fan base who isn't going to get on board with that if it's not well done.
yeah. And I think that's actually that was a great transition into my next point, Nick, was that the people that are maybe desiring to produce or direct or write a video game movie nowadays are the people that have been playing video games probably the most, if not their entire life. Because,
Hmm.
like, in general, like video games, they're not like a old media. Like
Hmm.
film and television and obviously books and comics, they all have years upon years of storytelling opportunities and risks and rewards and failures. But video games, like they've only started getting into the sort of real narrative weighty video games in probably the last maybe 5 to 15
I
years
would say
maybe.
like 15 to 20 years as far as
Yeah.
narrative driven video games. Like one of the
Yeah.
first really strong narratives I remember playing in a game was Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, which in itself
Yeah.
is sort of an adaptation from a movie because it's, a licensed property with Star Wars, but still, it told an original story, and I think that was 2002, so 20
Yeah.
years. It's
And
when
so
we really started
now
to see that.
And so now we're at a point where the people are at the age where they are going to be, in prominent positions in studios, or they have worked their way up the studio system and are prominent filmmakers or are established screenwriters, and they have relationships with video games for their entire life. Where some of the, old, Hollywood people that are still in the system, they may have never even picked up a video game
Hmm.
and played through the story of one. So they don't actually have that sort of personal connection to a video game, and they're not willing to put in the money to actually get a quality product. So what they see is dollars on the screen. This video game franchise made this much money. Let's get somebody to make a movie that has that name just so we can cash in on it. And that was
Hmm.
the original sort of scheme. But
Yeah.
now they'll come at it with the sense of like, well, I've played all the Uncharted games. I really love this series. I wanted to, see it on the big screen. I think it's got great narrative possibility. They adapt it like correctly and put it onto the screen with a big enough budget with movie stars like Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg, and they give it a proper go, and it pays off.
Hmm. And you look at even the actors too who are involved in these projects. You look at someone
Yeah.
like Henry Cavill, who makes
Yep.
no secret about how big of a nerd he is. Posts
Yeah.
videos of himself building his gaming PC that he's about to go play The Witcher on for 80 hours, and we see him. Obviously, The Witcher is more of an adaptation of the books, but I
Yeah.
think the Witcher's mainstream popularity largely comes from the video game series, especially The Witcher
Hmm.
3. And now we're hearing rumors of Henry Cavill being involved with the Mass Effect series that Amazon
Yep.
is rumored to be producing. And so
Hmm.
the actors too are involved and dedicated to making these movies not just cheap cash ins, but a good project for a passionate fan base. And even
Yeah.
someone like Dave Bautista has made no secret that he wants to play Marcus Phoenix in a Gears of War game. And I
Yeah.
love seeing that out of actors. I love seeing when they're committed to the role. They're not just in it for another paycheck. But that's not necessarily to say that just because you've got star power attached to the movie that it's going to do well. You look at
Hmm.
Assassin's Creed, and that was a
Yeah.
that was a pretty bad movie. But you've got Michael Fassbender, Jeremy Irons, Marion Cotillard, and
Hmm.
somehow the movie was still just a piece of shit that
Yeah.
really made my blood boil because they spent all
Mm.
this time on this bullshit expositional dialogue, and then they
Yeah.
focused the movie on the parts of the game that the people hate the most. Like, fans of the series have been saying for years, take out the modern day segments in Assassin's Creed, and all of a sudden they're making the movie and they're like, what modern day segment? Oh, say no more. And to be fair, the movie did some cool things. Like, I love
Yeah.
that they shot all the historical stuff exclusively in Spanish. That really helped sell me on the illusion of that.
Yep.
But it was another poorly written movie that was just capitalizing on the Assassin's Creed trademark. And
Hmm.
to me, that, as a fan of the series, it was frustrating to see.
Yeah. And like I feel like games like like Assassin's Creed will get another proper go. I do think we're getting a sequel to the 2016 Tomb Raider with Alicia Vikander. I think we are getting that because that one was also another one that just wasn't bad. It was totally fine, passable. Alicia Vikander is a really good actress. I think when she when that movie came out, she was just off her Academy Award win, and so she was, she was hot and she probably could have done anything, but she chose to do that. And, here we are, what, 5 years later, and they're maybe talking about a sequel.
I tried watching that one over the weekend. I couldn't really get into it, but I've also
Yeah.
never been a huge fan of the Tomb Raider games, so
Hmm.
I wasn't really as invested in the property. But
Yeah.
we have seen in the last few years a number of, I won't say great video game movies, but some really solid adaptations. You look at
Yes.
Detective Pikachu, and
Hmm.
between that and Uncharted, those are both really good movies, just on their
Yeah.
own feet. Like, even not as video game adaptations, but as movies, they were really enjoyable.
I
And
even thought Sonic was fine. Like Sonic was fun enough. Like I couldn't get anyone to come with me, but because there was a stigma. But I actually thought it was a pretty fun movie, and I'm gonna go see Sonic 2 when it comes out.
I enjoyed Sonic, but it had one of the problems that I feel a lot of video game adaptations have, and that's the failure on the part of the writers and directors to
Hmm.
embrace sort of the ridiculousness of video games. I feel like
Yeah.
if you're going to adapt a video game into a movie, you need to be invested in the world that that game takes place in and
Yeah.
just throw yourself into it, because I hate seeing things. And again, to rag on Monster Hunter, for some reason they had to shoehorn in the US military into
Yeah.
this fantasy game that is about fighting giant monsters with ridiculously oversized weapons. Where the
Yeah.
fuck does the US military come into that? You know, I feel like the thinking behind that was, okay, the players of these games come from our world, but they're transporting
Mhm.
themselves to another world when they get behind the controller and start playing that game. So what if we take regular humans and transport them literally into that world and have them have to go through the tutorial stages of the video game too?
Yeah.
And just don't. Okay,
Yeah.
I don't need to be handheld into the experience like that. Just give me a movie set in that world. So, what do you feel like the future of video game adaptations is? Because we've seen in the last few years these higher quality movies with Uncharted, with Detective Pikachu, and to some extent with Sonic. Again, I'm not as big of a fan of that, but what do you think? Are these video game movies trending in the right direction, or are we going to see more stuff like we've seen on Netflix with Arcane, which is doing really well? Like, critically, it's been
Hmm.
doing phenomenally. Or even Castlevania. There's a rumored Apex Legends series coming.
Yeah. I think the kind of arrival and like the thriving market for high budget streaming TV has been probably one of the best things to happen to video game adaptations, because one of the projects that I'm most excited about is they're adapting The Last of Us to HBO
Hmm.
as a series. And I think that if you tried to do The Last of Us as a movie, as I'm sure they probably tried to do for a little while before, this rise of the high budget streaming show, like it was not going to be as good as what we're going to get
Hmm.
in a, 8 to 10 hour, even a 6 to 8 hour streaming show.
Hmm.
And so I think these games with like really strong narratives that go on for 20 to 30 hours, like you can trim those down to like a 10 episode series and cut out some stuff, but still have enough substance that you're able to get a full sense of the game. But there's still going to be those movies and those adaptations that are not going to land. I think they're trying to adapt Call of Duty, which to me just sounds like they're doing a war movie
Yeah,
with a
that
name.
that sounds like a huge mistake. The same thing when I
Yeah.
hear rumors about a Grand Theft Auto adaptation. Those games don't really lend themselves well, I feel like, to movie adaptations, because
Yeah.
what narrative that does exist in them is pretty self-contained, and it's told well enough in the game that if you're adapting that to a screenplay, you're really just throwing the name on a generic movie of that type. A Grand Theft Auto movie, I
Yes.
feel like, would just be another generic heist movie.
Yeah, and so I do think that we are going to get more of that. I do hope that we get more into like onto film. because I do think there's a lot of opportunity to make really good quality theatrical experiences and big franchises out of like certain games. Um, like God of War could be a really cool one to see on like a big screen. I
Hmm.
don't know if that would really suit itself to the small screen streamer series like The Last of Us does, because The Last of Us in itself, like even though it's a big, post-apocalyptic world, it is kind of small scale and humanistic, and like personal relationships are at the forefront of it.
Hmm.
But with God of War, like I've only played a few hours of it, so I'm maybe not the best person to speak on that. But like that feels so big in scope that it should be on a big screen.
I think God of War could work as a series, but I agree it would be better suited, especially for the visual spectacle. I feel
Yeah.
like Kratos going up against just absolutely ginormous monsters is something that
Hmm.
you need to see on like an IMAX screen if they were going to do something
Yeah.
like that. So, the last thing I want to touch on is what do you think of video game movies casting for star power and not for whoever's best fit to the role? Because there's another video game movie casting that was announced recently, and we were talking about this a bit, that I feel like a lot of people sort of rolled their eyes at, and I think you know which one I'm talking about.
Are you talking about Chris Pratt in the Mario movie?
I am talking about Chris Pratt in the Mario movie.
See, that's an interesting one because obviously Nintendo has had pretty much no presence on the big screen other than like I guess loosely with the Pokemon Detective Pikachu movie, which
Mm,
the Pokemon Company is more involved than Nintendo is.
yeah.
But and like the Super Mario movie that came out in like the 90s.
Yeah,
And
1993. That one, I think
yeah.
that one scared Nintendo away, and it was again one of those movies where they
Mhm.
just refused to embrace the ridiculousness of the game. They had to have these two plumbers from Brooklyn get transported to this kingdom where humans evolved from dinosaurs, or some ridiculous
Something
stuff like that.
something
Yeah,
dumb,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And so I think that Nintendo is probably thinking, okay, you know what? We're back on the big screen. Let's go big. Let's cast all the well-knowns to take on these characters who have never been on the big screen like this, and go from there. And then one part of me feels like a little bit, like that's not gonna work because Chris Pratt is gonna sound like Chris Pratt. Like he's a good voice actor. Like he was great in the Lego movie, and
But he was just
oh
doing his
God.
own voice in the Lego
Yeah,
movie.
exactly, exactly. And so is he gonna do Chris Pratt voice for Mario? Because if that is the case, then that doesn't work for me.
Bro, we're having a dance off for the fate of the Mushroom Kingdom, Bowser.
Yeah, but like the thing about casting an unknown per se is, especially in Mario, is because people aren't going to the movie because Chris Pratt is playing Mario.
If
They're
anything,
going to the
that might
movie
keep
because
people
they're
away.
going to Mario. Yeah, they're going to the movie because it's Super Mario.
Yeah.
It's the one of the most recognizable characters in history.
Hmm.
And so of course they're going for Mario. They don't really care who's going to voice him as long as they do a good job and it's believable.
To close things out, other than Sonic the Hedgehog 2, are there any video game adaptations coming up that you're looking forward to, or are there any games that you would love to see adapted into either a screenplay or a television series?
Hmm. I mentioned The Last of Us. I think that is going to be a great series. I want them to do more Pokemon stuff. It was kind of a strange choice for them to do Detective Pikachu, but I guess it was a way to get people into that world and also have Ryan Reynolds voice Pikachu.
Yeah.
But then like I want like a good quality, probably like a streaming show or a movie series. I couldn't really they would have to figure it out because I want genuine Pokemon where we're
Mhm.
following a group of characters as they train or go through a conflict, and you know I don't know how they could do it because
Yeah.
the way that you do Pokemon, it seems so unnarrative like focused.
That's what I was gonna say. Is like the Pokemon games don't really lend themselves to a strong narrative because you're going
Yeah.
off on an adventure and getting into battles to beat gyms and become a Pokemon master. Whereas
Hmm.
Detective Pikachu, you can sort of follow a little more of a mystery storyline, and that lends
Yeah.
itself more to a movie.
Yeah, I mean, so like I don't know. I feel like they will do more Pokemon stuff eventually. I think they've actually had in works a live action series, but we'll see in a bit, I
Hmm.
guess. But yeah, something like that. I would also love to see a Metroid movie.
Oh.
I think that could be done either live action or as an animated movie. I think it would be really cool to do a live action one because Samus is a really cool character, and there's a lot of really cool stories you could do with her, just like, going around doing space shit, and I don't know. I just want to see it. I just think that would be cool. I think we need more sci-fi like that too. And like I think Apex could be a good series. I also think Overwatch, there's like some strong characters in there that, and obviously that has a narrative that it could work well as like a movie, but um, yeah, that would just have to be seen. What about you?
For me, for upcoming ones, I'm definitely looking forward to The Last of Us. What I would love to see, of course, we've got the rumored Mass Effect series. I love Mass Effect,
Yeah.
and I think that lends itself well to being one of these limited run series. Maybe do like 3 seasons, like I do a season for each game. One thing I've always wanted to see is a Legend of Zelda series, but the difficulty with that
Hmm.
is that I feel like it would be hard to get it right. And what I sort of had envisioned for it is sort of like a Doctor Who, in that, you know, how in Doctor Who, so many different actors have played the Doctor. And so with The Legend of Zelda, most different games star a different incarnation of Link. And so maybe getting a different actor in for each season to play a different incarnation of Link. Which,
That would be cool.
logistically, it might be a little bit difficult, but I'd be interested to see
Yeah.
it. I think what I would love to see the most, at least right now, though, is this rumored Apex Legends series because I
Hmm.
love the game so much right now, and I feel like there's so much lore in that world that
Yeah.
just really hasn't been given a good enough chance to shine. When you're playing the game, the lore doesn't really come through all that well. And sure, they've got like the comics or the little story bits you can collect throughout each season that you
Yeah.
play, but those don't really do enough to shed light on these really interesting and cool characters. So I would
Hmm.
love to see that explored in a more cinematic fashion.
Yeah. What do you think of this new Halo series that's coming out?
You know, I completely forgot about Halo until you just mentioned it right now, but that is something I'm actually really excited about. What I'm not
Yeah.
excited about is the fact that it's on Paramount Plus, because I don't need another streaming service, and I don't think Paramount
Yeah.
Plus has anything to offer me that I can't get out of another streaming service. So I really wish that Halo had been on a different platform, because then
Yeah.
I would definitely be leaning more towards watching it. But because I have to pay for another subscription service to watch it, it's kind of putting me off. It looks really well done. As far
Hmm.
as the visuals, it looks like it's stayed true to the source material. It is telling like an expanded story from the canon, but I'd be really interested to see that, and I think it has the potential to be really good. A lot of the video game movies we've gotten have, like you said, gone really into the sci-fi side of gaming. A lot of it has
Yeah.
been really, the fantasy stuff or, things like Pokemon or Sonic. So it's
Yeah.
like it's got sci-fi elements, sure, but it's not like full-on space opera sci-fi,
Hmm.
which I would love to see. And I think Halo's got the potential to be great, but again, not a fan of Paramount Plus.
No, and like I wasn't really wowed by the trailer. I am not like the greatest Halo fan ever, but something about the trailer to me just seemed almost too clean. Like it had sort of like a
Yeah,
digital look to it that I just wasn't really like vibing with.
the
So for
effects
me, it's a
felt a
wait and
little
see.
off for sure. Like there was something
Yeah.
about the visual effects that looked almost like a little too video gamey. But
Yeah.
I'm still excited to see how it pans out.
Yeah.
And maybe someday, if Paramount decides that Paramount Plus was a bad idea, which I think it was, someone
Yeah.
else will pick it up.
Yeah, I think this is their big swing. Like
Yeah.
they've had nothing else, so this is the one. Like if they can't pick it up, pick up an audience here, then I don't think they're going to be picking one up at all.
All right, well, that's going to do it for us today. Kyle, thank you again so much for joining me here on the L2Games Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It was fun to dish about some good and bad movies.
Yeah, and for those of you listening, make sure you go and check out Snubs Dubs. I'll leave a link in the description so you can go and check that out as soon as you're done here. And Kyle, again, thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Nick.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in to this episode of the L2 Games Podcast. We'll see you guys in the next one.
Bye-bye.